In this video, I'm going to describe the nature of the mxml programming language and take a look at and describe the syntax of the code that was generated during the design process in the last video. I've opened the file travelrequest.mxml and I'm going to go into source view. Notice, by the way, that you can go into source view in a number of different ways, including the keyboard shortcut, Control plus the tilde key. That's the key next to the number 1. That's a toggle keystroke that takes you back and forth between source and design view. Then I'm going to expand the source view editor so we can see as much code as possible. Let's start with the application tag. The mxml programming language is a pure XML-based language that describes an application through its containership. The top level or the root element in this file is called mx::application. The application tag set, which has a begin tag and an end tag wrapped around the rest of the application, always has something called a namespace declaration. The syntax xml::ns: in XML is a way of declaring a namespace. The nature of a namespace is that it's an arbitrary string that identifies to the XML processor which XML language is being used. The namespace http://www.adobe.com/2006/mxml is the unique identifier for the particular version of the mxml language used in Flex 3. The :mx after the xml::ns declaration, the syntax :mx after xml::ns and before the equals sign, is something called a namespace prefix. Namespace prefixes are arbitrary. That is, you can name them anything you want, but the default namespace prefix, mx, that's associated with the string ending with 2006/mxml, is used throughout the Flex documentation and example applications. And so it's very strongly encouraged that you always use mx as your namespace prefix as well. The mx prefix is declared in the root element of the application, and then it's applied to every declaration of an element that's a member of the mxml language. The application element, the panel element, the label, the text input, and the button element. These are all commands or tags or elements of the mxml language. When you see an mxml declaration such as mx::label, this is a declarative instantiation of an ActionScript class. The mx::label element is a reference to and a creation of an instance of that label class. And one of the most important components of the Flex framework, beyond the compiling tools and debugging tools, is the class library, the set of components that you use to plug in and put together a Flex application. The application container, the panel container, the label, the text input, and the button controls are all members of this Flex framework. The application itself has been set up with a layout of vertical. Now I'm going to add some hard returns here so that we can see the code completely on screen. And it's important to note that mxml, as an XML-based language, is not sensitive to white space. That is, you can add as many hard returns, line feeds, extra white space in terms of tabs or spaces as you like to make the code more readable. I do strongly recommend that you retain the indentation that you see in generated mxml code, as you see here, because it makes it easier to read the code and understand the parent-child relationship of objects to each other. For instance, the panel is a child of the application container, and the labels, text inputs, and button controls are children of the panel. This sort of containership is critical to understanding how Flex applications are laid out. The application and the panel both support a layout property. The possible values of the layout property are vertical, horizontal, and absolute. When you set up a layout property of vertical or horizontal, you're allowing the container to lay out its objects automatically. In this case, going back to design mode, I'll show you that the panel is a direct child of the application. The application's layout property is set to vertical, and that causes objects that are direct children of the application to be stacked in a single column vertically, one on top of another. I'll show you in a later video the difference between these different layout properties, but then I also want to show you that the panel container also supports the layout property, And here we've set its layout property to a value of absolute. The purpose of absolute layout is to allow you to place objects in specific positions relative to the top left corners of their applications. Each of the controls within the panel has an X and a Y property. The X property is the number of pixels from the panel's left border, and the Y property is the number of pixels from the top border of the panel. So a label with an X and a Y of 10 would be 10 pixels from the left and 10 pixels from the top. Now you can change these values manually in the source view, or you can go back to design view and move things around. For instance, I'll go back to design view and click and drag an object and move it around a little bit. Go back to source view, and I'll show that that text input control's X property has now changed to a new value of 78. I'll go back to design view, move it back into place using the alignment guides that appear automatically. Go back to code view, and you'll see that the X property is set once again back to 106, which matches the X property of the other text input, and in fact, that's what's determining the left alignment of the controls with each other. Each of the other XML attributes that you see listed here is either a property or a style. I'll be talking about styles more extensively in a later video. But regardless of whether something is classified as a property or a style, you can typically declare these settings through the use of mxml attributes. The background gradient alphas and background gradient colors, for instance, that are applied to the application are arrays of 2 values each. The background gradient colors takes an array of 2 colors, the first color being the top color and the second being the bottom, and the gradient is calculated automatically. Within the panel, there's a width and a height property. In my version of the application, the width and the height came out, respectively, at 306 pixels wide and 164 pixels high. I didn't have to figure out those numbers. I just used the design view of FlexBuilder and dragged the container to the size that I wanted. And all of the other settings, such as X and Y for each of the nested controls, was again automatically calculated by FlexBuilder's design view. Notice that the panel container has a title property. This is the value that's used as the title at the top of the panel. Going back to design view, you see the title listed there. I can change the value either in design view or in source view, and either way I'll be changing the view of both. And when I save and run the application, again, you'll see the results in the browser. So that's a look at the source code that makes up a Flex application. Now in a later video, I'm going to talk about the relationship between mxml and ActionScript, the programmatic language that's also used in building your Flex applications.